So I'm going to be brief, but now I have the unenviable position of being the 12th person on stage trying to say something useful. But I did want to just briefly give you a couple of things that I think the team, we've worked collectively on this place where you're at in your journey for many years, and hopefully try to impart a little bit of a few observations that I think we all would agree on, just that may help you in your journey. And a lot of this will be redundant because I think many of you have made some of the similar points. But the first thing I wanted to basically say here is that I'm one of you. About 16 years ago this week, I believe, I sat in this room as a Phase I grantee, PI, as a founder of a startup. And I'm thankful that I did it early because I don't think my company would get funded these days. I think when I got funding, it was like 20-something% success rate. And I don't think I was in the top 10%. That was my hunch anyway. So I'm excited to see how great all of your companies are. And I'm glad I was able to get the support from NSF before it got so competitive. But like I said, I did this for 6 years before I came to NSF. And one of the things that when I was interviewing here and I was eventually hired, and I saw the caliber of the people who work here, and at some point I just kind of in joking, I was like, what? I asked a colleague, I was really surprised I got hired here, and he told me without really a whole lot of humor in his voice, he said, "You were hired for your scar tissue," which I guess is something that every team needs. So based on our collective scar tissue, I just wanted to share. And the thing I wanted to do is I have four pieces of data that reflect on your cohort, the people in this room and the companies we funded. When you guys applied to this program, you filled out all these government documents. One of the things you filled out was a cover page, the front of your proposal. There's a bunch of pages, and there's one page of that proposal, you probably don't remember, very specific to the SBIR program. It had a whole bunch of certifications that you'll hear about later today about things you can do wrong that will get you in trouble. But there's also 4 questions we ask that are kind of buried in all those certifications that actually I think are 4 relevant pieces of data to give you a sense about how to approach this opportunity. And so I'm going to go through those 4 pieces of data and try to explain what I think that that entails for your company. So the first thing that I will tell you is that of the companies in the room here, 56% of you were not around 2 years ago, 24 months, and this is all data as of when you applied. I guess you guys all applied in December last year. So at that point in time, 56% of you had been around for less than 2 years. And when you take that out to about 5 years, it's something like 70 or 80%. And so you are startups. And I just wanted to, I can go through these, but let me just kind of focus on this one first. When you look at small businesses in this country, or all businesses in this country, there's a lot of government data you can pour through. And so depending on how you slice it, if you look at all the small businesses in the country that have at least one employee, there's a lot of companies that are kind of dormant that are on paper, but all the companies that actually have at least one person working for them, there's about 5 million of those businesses. And I'm sure all of you know that any small business is difficult to get going. Most of them fail in the first 5 years. But you're not normal small businesses, no offense. You are kind of a very specific, peculiar type of small business. So if you take that 5 million and you specifically narrow it down by what I would call technology businesses, and you can get this data by looking at companies that have intellectual assets like patents and things like that. So if you look at those companies only, that's about 75,000 in the country. So that's about 1.5% of all small businesses. And again, a lot of those companies are companies that have been in existence for quite a while. So that's companies that have been around for 30 years, companies that are brand new. And so you are actually even a smaller subset. You are more or less technology startups. So that's some fraction of 1% of all the small businesses in the country. And so you've done a very special thing. You've taken all the normal risk that any entrepreneur faces when they're starting their restaurant or their landscaping business. And then you've done something even more difficult, which is that you've started a business based on a technology that does not work yet, which is kind of amazing when you think about it. And so you have taken all the normal risks that everybody has taken on, and you've added 2 gigantic risks to your company. And one of the ways I like to think about you as companies is you are a big collection of risks. And so I don't know if you've seen this quote from Eric Ries, again, from the Lean Startup phenomenon. This idea of extreme uncertainty, right? That's risk. That's what he's talking about. And so the two risks that you've taken on are technical risk. You've taken on the risk that your product may never work the way it needs to work to satisfy the market. And because your technology has never been seen by the world, you have this huge business model risk, which is to say, once the technology exists, you don't really know who's going to want it, why they want it, who's going to distribute it, what the costs are going to be, all these things, right? And so we've talked about this, but my first piece of advice for you is that, again, I'm going to reiterate, most of you will fail for market reasons, for commercial reasons, and CB Insights, which also is one of our grantees, has this interesting postmortem about reasons that startups fail. So again, based on that technical risk and that business model risk, the business model risk is the bigger risk. And it's especially important that you not be complacent about that because for two reasons. One is that you have technical risk, but you have an investor who is giving you money to de-risk your technology, right? These folks here. That's what your money from the government is for. It is intended so you have money to attract that technical risk. In most cases, you don't have money to attack business model risk, right? And so there's a danger that because somebody's paying me for this, I'm going to focus on this thing. But I want to encourage you, even though there's not somebody maybe writing you a check to prove out your business model, that you continue to focus on this. And so that's really my primary takeaway here is that if you do not spend an hour on your business model for every hour you spend in the lab working on your technology, you are creating an issue, potential issue for your company. So I'll encourage you, by whatever means you need to beg, borrow, or steal to create the space and create the bandwidth to work on your business model continuously. And the way that you will know that your business model is ready is that people other than the government will start cutting you big checks, hopefully. So next piece of data. Okay. 3/4 of you have 3 or fewer employees. Again, this is the nature of the startup business. One of the things that this obviously means is that every person working in your company is critical. And anything you can do to get each of those people to be a little bit more effective will dramatically improve your chances of success. But one of the things that I found about startup companies is that all of you have much better funded, more established, bigger competitors, all of you. And there's only really 2 things in general that you can count on as advantages in that battle. One is that you have technology. You have something that you can do that they can't. And again, we're trying to support you to develop that advantage. And we hope that you continue to make your product technically proven and bring it to realization. The other thing that you have that most of your bigger competitors don't have is you have agility. You have the ability to move faster, to make decisions quicker, and to be agile, to change things in a more fluid fashion than your competitors can. And the second piece of advice really is based on trying to maximize that advantage of agility, because you're only going to be able to be agile as a company if your team is working in a certain way. And what struck me a couple of years ago when I saw this piece, there's this quote that's always stuck with me. This is an article about a basketball player named Russell Westbrook. But the quote that the sentence that I put at the bottom really struck me as something that captures what I think is important for your startup, and that is you are in a place where there is an absence of guarantees. There's an absence of certainty. And so, as the quote says, you can bank on only one thing: total presence, total sincerity, total effort, all the time. And what this means is this is something that is about your team, right? So my point here is if your team is not sincere, is not present some of the time, is not committed to this venture, you're going to forfeit that ability to be agile, which is to say, learn something on Tuesday morning and change something on Tuesday afternoon, right? So anything you can do between now and as your company grows to ensure that not everybody in your team needs to be working 80-hour weeks, right? There's people doing technical work that they can be part-time. But there's some people in your team, typically 1 or 2 people, who are going to be responsible for making all the critical decisions probably for at least the next 2 or 3 years. And if those people are not present, if they are not sincere and honest about the risks they face and the uncertainty, you lose that advantage that you have to make close this feedback loop and to continue to be agile as a company. So anything you can do to make sure that your key decision makers are engaged, honest, and really just there every day working together in an efficient fashion, that's all going to help you. Another way to say this is that all of my colleagues and I have observed we've had a lot of serial entrepreneurs come through this program and succeed. We've had a lot of first-time entrepreneurs come through this program and succeed. We have not had a lot of part-time entrepreneurs come through this program and succeed. So please, anything you can do to get to that place will give you a better shot. Here's a data point. You told us when you applied whether you've had a Phase 2 award from any program in the government, from any small business, SBRS, TTR program. That's only a few of you. This is a good news, bad news situation. Good news is that means many new companies have gotten a chance by us funding you. The bad news is that the implication of this is that, especially if you get a Phase 2 next year or the year after, you probably won't be back here, right? Only 4% of you had a Phase 2 before and came back into this room. And so the bad news is the NSF is only a temporary patch to your company. We're not going to support you probably long term. And so, as some of my colleagues said, you need to use this opportunity because it is fleeting. And eventually, other agencies might be willing to fund you after us, but typically, this is a one-shot deal, right? You're going to graduate. And so what I would say is somebody needs to write a check, typically. Most of our companies, even if they get a Phase 2 award, they're not ready to be self-sufficient financially when that award ends. Even if you get a Phase 2B award, which we'll talk about, and this is even despite the fact that if you get a Phase 2 award, the average amount of money you can expect to get from this program is about $1.3 million. That's not insignificant, but it's still nowhere near enough. And it's especially not near enough if you're trying to get to the very lofty commercial and market goals that you've told us about in your Phase 1 proposal, which are great goals. So you need to start this process of customer discovery or whatever process you need to start thinking about where else can we get resources? And again, this is a separate group of stakeholders, but you can apply all the same rules that you learned doing customer discovery for customers to understand investors and to understand other sources of support. Here's the good news. By nature of being funded by this program, you have the ability to do that. You have the ability to raise funding. And what I've done here is I've looked at our portfolio companies and just public investment. So again, this is all publicly announced, typically equity investment. This is all from the last 2 weeks. This is $160 million that our portfolio companies have raised since Labor Day. And this is companies across the technological spectrum. So again, you hear all this news about how investors don't touch technology risk. And there's truth to that, but you all have the ability to attract funding. And I know I've only listed venture capital mostly here because that's because there's public sources for that. But it may be another source of capital. But in some form, somebody is going to be willing to write you a check, but you have to start laying the groundwork for that now. And the other thing I want to say here before I move is, on the right side, I have a little blurb about Synovia Technologies that raised $8 million in Series A. I'd like to have you guys stand up. They're in the room here today. Sorry to do this. Put them on the hook. Stand up. Whitney, George, congratulations. So if you guys want to know who's buying the drinks at the reception, there's your people. Just memorize what they look like now. They look like $8 million. Anyway, so the one thing actually that I found interesting that Whitney just told me this morning when I talked to her was that as soon as we figured out the product market fit, that investment clicked. And so again, just to reiterate this idea of customer discovery, that was critical, it sounds like, for your investment. All right, last thing I'll say is actually not advice. People tell you that when you pitch, you need to have an ask, right? Anytime you're able to get in front of people and talk about what you're doing, you should have an ask. Like, what do you want people to do? And so this piece of data is our ask to you. So the piece of data that I have is that for about half of you, you are here because of the first time you ever submitted a proposal to NSF, you got your Phase 1 award. And congratulations, it's not an easy process to get through, and I certainly didn't get it my first time, so I'm impressed. That's a very unique stat for the federal government. This number is way higher than it is for any other program that I know in the government. And most of the time, the first-time submitters account for 10 or 20% or less of the funding. This outlines kind of an interesting characteristic and problem of our program. This is, it's a little hard to see, but this is, there's a lot of different SBIR programs in the government. This is the 5 biggest ones, 5 biggest agencies that run this program. And I've plotted the percentage of all their Phase I awards that have gone, that represent the first ever award to the company from the government. And this is old data, so it only goes up to 2014, but this trend's basically continuing. So what you see is that back in 2014, NSF, about 70% of our Phase I awards were the first award the company had ever gotten from the government. That number is now in the mid-80s, typically. And so other agencies typically range from 10 to about 35%. I think that's great about our program, but it creates an issue. And what that means is that if I'm NASA and I want to make 100 awards, SBIR awards, I only need to find 10 new companies, right? 90% of those awards are going to go to companies that already have applied and have already gotten funding and know about the program. We have to continue, if we want to continue funding startups for the first time, we have to continue to find new applicants. And again, no one else in the government has to deal with this problem. And it's a marketing challenge, right? We basically have said we want new customers. Even though we have a $200 million budget, the government's ability to market ourselves is a little bit limited. And that's where my ask comes in. You are the best source of referrals, if you want to use that term, to new applicants that we have. You live in the places and work in the places where these companies are theorized and are created and are conceived, and you see them before we do. And we need you to pay it forward by getting the word out about our program. And now that I've told you some data about the kind of companies we look for, I hope you internalize that, and I hope you make the introduction to myself or your program director when you see folks thinking about starting a company or an interesting technology or anything that may end up being a Phase I applicant. Because again, the name of the game here is we want to fund as many new companies and give them their first shot as possible. So anything that we can do to help you to get the word out, if each of you brings one, over the life of your NSF funding, brings one great new applicant, we will have a great pipeline of companies to fund. But we really hope you can help us with that. We don't ask for a whole lot. We don't want our money back. We don't want a piece of your company. We want you to help get the word out. So anything you can do, we really appreciate it. And finally, I'll leave with this. We're really impressed and inspired by you. According to Teddy Roosevelt, your face is marred with dust and sweat, and that's really where it happens. So we're here to help you, but we're not in the arena. And so we wish you the best of luck, and I hope to meet many of you throughout the day today. Thank you.